Hello, I'm Mike Watts, publisher of RiversandFeathers.com, a website devoted to short stories on just about anything fly fishing. Welcome to our Rivers and Feathers instructional fly tying videos, along with Alex Hawley, a former student and teaching assistant in fly fishing and fly tying, and an excellent fly tyer. We'll be leading you on the different patterns and recipes as we go along our journey, and use these patterns to help you catch more fish. Alex will also talk about some of the techniques on how to fish the flies and where to fish them as he explains the recipes. Welcome to Rivers and Feathers.
Today we're going to be tying what I call a guide's choice hare's ear. It's a big fly here in Clemson, South Carolina, as well as Western North Carolina. It imitates a lot of things and has a lot of buggy characteristics that you'll see in the water. I fish this fly almost every time I go out just because of its productivity. To begin this fly, I like to use a fulling mill size 12 hook with a 2.8 millimeter gold bead. This fly can be fished up and down in sizes. However, the bigger the sizes, the more buggier it looks, so it can imitate some of those larger stone flies, which I like as well. To begin this fly, I start to wrap my thread on the hook, make a couple wraps, and cut my excess off. For this fly, I'm using UTC Ultra thread in a 140 size, and I'll begin wrapping towards the back of my hook, making a nice thread base. For the tail of this fly, I like to use a hare's mask, and I like to specifically use the cheek, as these have some longer fibers on them. You can also use the inside or the nose of the hare's ear if you want to use things for dubbing and things of that nature. It's a little shorter, and you can also get darker and lighter patterns. To make the tail, I like to grab just a little pinch of fibers, and to make sure I can get the most use out of them, I try and cut them at the base as best as I can. Grabbing them with my left hand, I then like to make sure I get all the fluff out from the tail, and this will help securing it to the hook, just because you don't have to tie over that. Now, these fibers can be later used for dubbing of this fly or other patterns, but as you can see, I have a nice buggy looking tail. I'll then measure up to make sure I have about the length of the hook shank as the tail, and make a loose wrap over it, making sure all the fibers are in the right place where I like them, followed by a second wrap where I'll begin to tighten it up a little bit. I'll then begin taking my thread and wrapping it towards the eye of the hook, creating a nice body for the fly. You can also take this excess once you get to about the bead and trim it out. That way your thread isn't getting messed up at all. For the body of this fly, I then like to use hairline dubbing hare's ear in a HD4 color. This is a lighter color that I think is really well. That will be used for the body, as well as a ribbing of this fly in a UTC French tinsel, and this is in a medium. I like to cut about 2 to 3 inches off. Make sure I have enough room to work with. And then to create a ribbing, I always like to tie it in on the side of my hook, making sure that it has a nice uniform body. A lot of times when I tie things on the top of the fly, for some reason it just doesn't like to wrap right. But I take this tinsel and I wrap it towards the back of the fly, leaving it right where I tied in my tail at. I then take my hairline dubbing, take just a small pinch. Remember, whenever you're using dubbing, that less is more. I'll then take this and begin to make a small dubbing noodle on my thread. I do this by spinning it on the thread and working it up and down until it's about the size that I like. I find that the synthetic dubbing is a little more buggy looking. It has a lot of stray fibers that you can easily pick out and brush out. I'll then take my dubbing noodle and slide it up to the hook shank, from which I will then begin wrapping my dubbing, making sure I cover all of my thread up towards the bead of the hook. You want to make sure that you have a nice uniform body of your fly. And then I will take my tinsel and I will actually counter wrap this, which not only secures the dubbing but also creates ribbing, imitating lots of nymphs that you'll find in the water. I like to make open spiral wraps, making sure that they're all even. And once I get to the end of that dubbing, I will hold it with my finger and make one tight wrap over the tinsel and another in front of it before I trim. The next step for this fly is to create a collar, in which case I'll use the hairline peacock dubbing. For this, you'll only need a very, very small amount, as it will sit just behind the bead. So again, I take a small pinch and spin it on my thread to create a dubbing noodle. As you can see, it's very small, only about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch is all you need. And then I'll begin wrapping this over top of itself to create a nice collar. Lastly, what I will tie in is a Nature Spirit partridge feather. And to tie this in, I like to take all the fluff of the feather and peel it back from the stem. That way, whenever I hold it, I can easily tie it into the fly. So now I have my feather, and to tie it in, I always like to tie my feathers in tip first. So I'll splay those fibers back from the stem just to expose that tip. I will then take this and make a wrap over that tip right where it meets the stem. I usually like to make it 2 wraps just to make sure it's nice and secure. It has a tendency to slip sometimes. So I'll make 2 wraps behind it and 2 wraps in front of it. And then I like to go ahead and trim my excess. From here, I then like to counter wrap in the direction of my thread to create a nice uniform hackle. And once you start to run out of hackle on your stem and you're left with nothing but exposed stem, I'll then take my thread and make a nice securing wrap over it, as well as in front of it until I feel like it's nice and secure and nothing's going anywhere. Then take your scissors, get in there nice and close and trim it off. Then I like to make a nice hot spot collar right behind the bead. As you can start to see that red thread shining through. And that's when I'll let my whip finish take over and finish it up with about 4 to 5 wraps, making sure everything is nice and secure before trimming it off. I talked about this fly earlier being very buggy, and that dubbing really helps with that. So one thing that you can do is you can take a nice brush. It can be a Velcro brush or as well as a metal brush, and get in there nice and close and just kind of pick out that dubbing a little bit. And all this does is make it just a little more buggy. Looks like some legs hanging off there. As you can see, that's our God's Choice Hare's Ear. I like to fish this in all conditions. I really think this is a great fly, especially for western North Carolina as well as rivers along the East Coast. This is a great fly to get down deep as a bottom fly if you're fishing a double rig nymph, or if you're trying to just fish this as a single rig.
Thank you for tuning in to our Rivers and Feathers YouTube video on instructional fly tying. Also, be sure to tune in to the RiversandFeathers.com, where you'll find short stories on just about anything fly fishing. And we want to give a special thanks to Regal Bice. They have supported our efforts in our instructional videos, and we've enjoyed our revolution. And on that vise you can tie anything from midges to monster flies. Remember, RiversandFeathers.com.